Imagine waking up to the smell of frying potato peels, not because it's a choice, but because it's all you had. In a time when paychecks vanished and grocery shelves mocked empty wallets, American families turned to whatever they could find. Old bacon grease, a spoon of sugar, leftover rice, even JellO mixed with Coca-Cola and vegetables. These weren't trendy recipes. They were survival. From hot water cornbread that warmed cold cabins, to vinegar pie that tricked your tongue into thinking you were eating something fancy, these dishes were born from grit, resourcefulness, and a relentless will to feed those you love. But somewhere between progress and prosperity, we forgot them. I'm Mohammed Saqib Khan, and in today's episode, we're diving deep into 10 hauntingly humble Depression-era recipes that once kept America going. You might laugh at a mayonnaise sandwich now, but back then it was a lifeline. So stay with me till the end, because by the time we're done, you'll never look at a rice pudding the same way again. And you just might feel grateful for every bite you've ever taken. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't soft. And it sure wasn't made with butter or buttermilk. Hot water cornbread was born out of necessity, shaped by poverty, sharpened by survival, and handed down by families who had no room for waste. Back in the Deep South, especially during the Great Depression, flour was a luxury. But cornmeal? It was cheap, local, and plentiful. Farmers could grow it. Families could store it. And when times got tight, corn became the backbone of every meal. But without eggs, without milk, what could you really make? That's where this clever trick came in. All you needed was cornmeal, a pinch of salt, and boiling water. Mix it just right, form small patties by hand, and drop them straight into a pan of hot grease, usually saved bacon fat, or if you were lucky, lard. The result? A crusty, golden cake with a gritty bite and a warm center. Served hot, often with beans, greens, or just on its own, hot water cornbread filled stomachs with dignity when there wasn't much else on the table. It wasn't written in cookbooks. It was passed down from grandmother to granddaughter, around wood-burning stoves and supper tables worn thin by time. For African American families in the rural South, this wasn't just food. It was a ritual, a connection to ancestors, and a quiet rebellion against hunger. Even today, a single bite can take someone back, to barefoot childhoods, to hand-me-down kitchens, to days when food meant survival. So the next time you think of comfort food, remember that some of the simplest recipes came from the hardest times. And yet, they live on. Hot water cornbread, a Depression-era dish that never gave up. They weren't soft. They didn't sparkle. And there was no frosting, no sprinkles, no fancy shapes. Sunday sugar cookies were the kind of treat that showed up only once a week, if that. And in the 1930s, that Sunday meant everything. In an era when butter was rationed and eggs were bartered like gold, baking cookies was more than just cooking. It was a celebration. Especially in small-town America, where families had more mouths than money, these humble cookies became a quiet way of holding on to joy. Made with just a handful of pantry staples, flour, sugar, water, or milk, maybe a spoonful of lard or shortening, these cookies weren't about indulgence. They were about memory, about gathering, about a mother saving just enough sugar from the week's coffee ration to make something sweet for her children after Sunday church. Sometimes, the dough was so dry it had to be pressed by hand. Other times, it was rolled and cut with a drinking glass. No electric mixer. No parchment paper. Just patience and love. And when they came out of the oven, crisp on the outside, a little chewy inside, they tasted like hope. Not because they were the best cookie you ever had, but because they were made when no one thought dessert was possible. These cookies were shared on porches, passed to neighbors, and hidden in tin boxes for later. Even the crumbles were saved. And though decades have passed, the memory of Sunday sugar cookies still lingers for those who lived through it, each bite a reminder that happiness didn't come in abundance. It came in small, sweet moments, often baked from nearly nothing. Sunday sugar cookies. Proof that even in the hardest times, America never stopped finding a reason to smile. Waste nothing. That wasn't just advice during the Great Depression. It was survival. And that's where fried potato peels earned their place in American kitchens. Not as a delicacy, but as a symbol of what families were willing to do just to make it through another day. In a time when potatoes themselves were a luxury, tossing out the peels was unthinkable. Every scrap mattered. So instead of discarding those paper-thin skins, clever homemakers washed them, patted them dry, and threw them straight into a pan of hot grease, often leftover bacon fat or drippings from the last meal. The result? Crispy, salty, golden slivers, light as air, yet deeply satisfying. Some sprinkled salt or onion powder. Others just ate them plain, hot off the stove. And kids? They thought it was magic, how something meant for the compost turned into a crispy snack. But behind the crackle of those frying skins was a deeper truth. These weren't just depression chips. They were made because cupboards were bare, and dinner had to stretch farther than it should. Fried potato peels were often served with beans, cornbread, or even just a glass of buttermilk. They weren't the side dish. They were the meal. And yet, somehow they felt like a treat. That's the spirit of the era. Making do, making something out of nothing, and never letting pride get in the way of feeding your family. Today, we toss those peels without a second thought. But back then, they were gold. Crispy, homemade gold fried in a skillet seasoned with struggle and love. Fried potato peels. A forgotten crunch from a time when nothing was wasted, and every bite mattered. No lemons. No limes. And certainly no fresh fruit. But somehow, there was pie. Vinegar pie is one of the most surprising and forgotten recipes from America's Great Depression. A dessert born not out of luxury, but out of pure necessity. You see, in the 1930s, fresh citrus was a distant dream. Expensive. Perishable. But people still craved that bright, tart flavor, especially for special occasions like Sunday supper or holidays. So what did they do? They turned to vinegar, yes, ordinary pantry vinegar, to mimic the acidic tang of lemons. And remarkably, it worked. The filling was made with sugar, flour, water, a bit of butter, and just enough vinegar to create that magical illusion of lemon custard. Poured into a basic pie crust, often lard-based or made from scraps, it was baked until the center was golden, jiggly, and just firm enough to slice. There was no topping, no meringue, no garnish. But when it cooled and that tart sweet scent filled the kitchen, it felt like a celebration. For many rural families, this was their only taste of pie all year long. And it wasn't just about flavor, it was about pride. Because even when the pantry was nearly bare, a mother, a grandmother, or a farm wife could still serve dessert. She could still give her family something that felt normal, comforting, even beautiful. Vinegar pie is a quiet legend from the American table. It doesn't shout. It doesn't sparkle. But its story is steeped in courage, creativity, and the power of making something from nearly nothing. And maybe that's what makes it unforgettable. Vinegar pie. A forgotten slice of American resilience, with a tang of hope baked right in. It was just 2 slices of bread and a smear of mayonnaise. No meat. No lettuce. No tomato. Just mayo, spread as wide as you could make it stretch. To many today, a plain mayonnaise sandwich might sound odd, maybe even unappetizing. But during the Great Depression, it was a lifesaver. When the fridge was empty and paychecks had stopped coming, people turned to what they had, shelf-stable basics. Mayonnaise, with its mix of oil, egg, and vinegar, was cheap to make, or even cheaper to buy in bulk. And white bread, mass-produced and filling, became the canvas for many makeshift meals. For thousands of struggling families, this sandwich wasn't about taste. It was about survival. You'd eat it slowly, chewing each bite longer than you needed to, hoping it would last a little longer in your stomach. Sometimes kids brought these to school, wrapped in wax paper or a reused paper bag, while others quietly ate them at home, away from watching eyes. In cities and rural towns alike, the plain mayo sandwich became a symbol of hardship no one wanted to talk about, but everyone understood. But here's the thing. It wasn't always served with shame. Some mothers dressed it up with a dash of pepper or a sprinkle of sugar. Others toasted the bread for crunch. Because even when options were few, the effort to make something from so little was an act of love. And that's what this sandwich truly represents, not just struggle, but strength. Mayonnaise sandwiches, plain. A humble meal with a heavy past, proof that even in the leanest times, families found a way to hold on. No boxed mix. No nonstick pans. No maple syrup drizzled from a bottle. Just a hot skillet, a wooden spoon, and a recipe memorized through hardship. Buttermilk pancakes from scratch weren't a luxury, they were survival dressed up as a treat. During the Great Depression, families had to get creative with the simplest of ingredients. Flour, salt, baking soda, maybe an egg if the hens were laying. And if they were lucky, buttermilk. Not the cultured kind you find in cartons today, but the thin, tangy leftover liquid after churning butter. It was sour. It was cheap. And it was gold in the hands of a determined cook. Early each morning, mothers or grandmothers would whip together a loose batter and ladle it carefully onto a hot griddle, usually greased with bacon fat or leftover lard. The pancakes were small, uneven, often cooked over a wood stove. But they were warm, filling, and made the house smell like comfort, even when there was little of it to go around. Toppings? Forget it. Maybe a spoon of sugar, a bit of molasses, or if times were really tough, just a pat of lard and a sprinkle of salt. But still, these pancakes were something to look forward to, especially on Sundays or holidays when families tried to pretend, just for a moment, that things were okay. They didn't rise much. They weren't fluffy, but they were made from scratch, with love, determination, and whatever the pantry could offer. And maybe that's why they've lasted, quietly passed down, kitchen to kitchen, skillet to skillet. Buttermilk pancakes from scratch. A Depression-era comfort food that flipped hardship into something warm, simple, and unforgettable. To most people today, it would sound unthinkable. A sandwich filled with nothing but bacon grease. No bacon. No cheese. No vegetables. Just warm, salty fat spread between two slices of bread. But during the darkest days of the Great Depression, this simple, greasy meal wasn't strange. It was survival. Bacon itself was rare in working-class kitchens. You didn't waste it, not a strip, not a scrap, and certainly not the drippings left behind. That leftover grease, collected in a tin or glass jar by the stove, was pure flavor, used to fry eggs, season beans, or, when there was nothing else, make a sandwich. The process was simple. Take 2 slices of white bread, sometimes stale, sometimes toasted if you had access to heat, and spread a generous layer of cooled bacon fat between them. Some families added a sprinkle of salt. Others, a dash of pepper or sugar to give it more body. That was it. Rich in calories. Filling. For hungry kids, it quieted their stomachs. For parents, it was heartbreaking, but necessary. Because when meat ran out and ration books were empty, bacon grease became a stand-in for comfort. And despite how humble it was always served with care. Because even in times of hardship, presentation mattered. Love mattered. In mining towns, farmhouses, and urban tenements across America, this sandwich told a silent story. Of meals stretched past their limits. Of pride swallowed in the name of nourishment. Of families refusing to go to bed hungry. Today, it may seem strange. But back then it was a lifeline. A greasy symbol of the fight to endure. Bacon grease sandwiches. A Depression-era meal that fed the body, and proved just how far love could spread. It wiggled. It shimmered. And it held just about everything. From shredded carrots to chopped celery, canned pineapple to cottage cheese, sometimes even olives or tuna. If you could chop it and suspend it, it went into JellO. And yes, even Coca-Cola. Welcome to the world of Depression-era gelatin, salads. In the 1930s and 40s, JellO wasn't just dessert, it was a miracle. Cheap, colorful, easy to prepare, and shelf-stable, it became a household favorite for families who wanted to stretch their groceries while still putting something special on the table. When fresh produce or protein wasn't available, people got creative. They added whatever they had on hand, leftover vegetables, canned fruit, pickles, or even mayonnaise, right into the gelatin mold. Some versions used Coca-Cola or fruit soda instead of water, giving the dish a bubbly sweetness. In church cookbooks and family gatherings, these gelatin creations were called salads, even though they had no greens at all. It sounds strange to us now. But back then, it was a point of pride. A centerpiece dish that looked impressive, no matter what was actually inside. For mothers hosting Sunday dinners or church socials, JellO allowed them to present a dish that was colorful, modern, and full of something. Anything. And despite its odd combinations, it brought families together. Kids loved the texture. Adults appreciated the effort. And everyone understood what it represented. Resourcefulness, not waste. Creativity, not lack. These strange, jiggling molds reflected the spirit of the era, doing the best with what you had and making it look like more than it was. JellO with everything. A wobbly time capsule of Depression-era determination and surprisingly sweet survival. It started with scraps. A scoop of cold rice from last night's dinner. A splash of milk. Maybe a little sugar, if you had any left. And just like that, you had rice pudding from leftovers, a Depression-era dessert that turned nothing into something. In the 1930s, every bite mattered. Food wasn't just cooked, it was conserved, repurposed, and stretched across as many meals as possible. And when it came to leftover rice, waste was never an option. Families across America, especially in the South and among immigrant households, learned to transform yesterday's plain boiled rice into a warm, comforting dessert that felt like more than it was. There was no exact recipe. Just intuition, tradition, and whatever the pantry could offer. Some used milk and sugar. Others added water, a bit of lard, or a spoonful of molasses. Cinnamon if it was affordable. Raisins if you were lucky. And sometimes, just a cracked egg to thicken it, beaten in with care. It simmered slowly on the stove, filling the kitchen with a scent that felt like hope. Warm, sweet, and familiar. It was served warm on cold nights, or chilled and packed for the next day. And for many children of that era, this dish became a memory they carried for life, not because it was luxurious, but because it was made with quiet love in hard times. Rice pudding from leftovers wasn't about indulgence. It was about making the most of what you had, and never letting a single grain go to waste. It's soft, simple, honest. A dessert that came from nearly nothing, but fed more than just hunger. Rice pudding from leftovers. A sweet echo of Depression-era wisdom, and the flavor of a mother's determination. It wasn't creamy. It wasn't topped with whipped peaks or marshmallows. But it was warm, and it felt like hope in a cup. Depression-era hot chocolate was more than a drink. It was a quiet comfort in a world that had gone cold. In the hardest winters of the 1930s, when money was gone and heaters ran dry, families turned to this humble homemade remedy, a flicker of sweetness in the middle of hardship. The ingredients were simple: water, a spoonful of cocoa powder, sugar if you had it, and maybe a splash of evaporated milk. No luxury. Just enough to warm the hands, and maybe the heart. Mothers stirred it slowly in dented pots. Fathers sipped it in silence after long days of looking for work. Children cupped their hands around tin mugs, not realizing this simple drink would become a memory stitched into their souls. Sometimes bread crusts were dipped in. Sometimes it was thinned with more water to make it last. And yet, it tasted like kindness, because it meant someone had taken the time to make something, anything, that felt special. It wasn't hot chocolate the way we know it today. It was something deeper, a promise in a cup. That warmth still existed. That love still showed up. This was the last sip of resilience before the lights went out. Depression-era hot chocolate. A bittersweet reminder that even in the darkest times, small comforts carried big meaning. And there you have it, 10 forgotten Depression-era dishes that once fed a hungry, hurting nation. If any of these stirred your heart or your hunger, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because here at Nation of History, we bring the past back to the table, one humble bite at a time.